Thanks for the warm welcome. That's very kind. So, welcome to my talk. This is Trans I for the Cis Ally. My name is Julien. I use they, them pronouns. I used to be a cartoonist. Now I'm a software engineer. I've been working as a programmer for like the last 4.5 years. I work at Agrilist, which is an indoor agriculture management platform. We are hiring, of course, so feel free to talk to me if you're interested in learning more about that. I am like contractually obligated to say that. In my spare time, I enjoy powerlifting, hanging out with my very cute dog. His name is JPEG. I enjoy obsessively reading about the details of Freddie Mercury's life. And finally, I'm a little bit of a Queer Eye superfan. So, like, what is Queer Eye? Before we get into the actual topic of the talk, I feel like I need to give a little background regarding Queer Eye so we're all on the same page. Queer Eye is a show on Netflix that, on its surface, is a makeover show where 5 gay guys take one person each episode and make over their hair, their clothes, their house, their cooking ability, but most importantly, their feelings. So usually it's someone who's had a really hard time in their life and they've struggled in some way, and so like the Fab Five, as they're called, they come together and they help them get their whole life together. Almost every episode of the show ends up being really emotional. This is Anthony crying. So if you've never watched it before and you really want to watch like a feel-good tearjerker show, I highly recommend it. So I should also mention that even though I'm definitely like a super fan, I also don't think it's perfect. And there's a lot of valid critiques of many aspects of the show. So even though I'm not going to talk about those, I'm really happy to talk about all the various critiques of Queer Eye, like in the hall or on Twitter or whatever. So if you want to talk about that later, I'm more than happy. So anyway, moving on. So like, what does that have to do with anything? Why are we talking about this right now? This talk is called Trans Eye for the Cis Ally, after the title from the original version of Queer Eye, which was Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. I've never watched the original, so like definitely don't ask me anything about it. I don't care. I don't know anything. It's honestly really different from the modern Queer Eye, so anyway, yeah, I was just being clever. So in this case, I'm the Trans Eye. You're probably the Cis Ally if you're here. You're likely interested in making your workplaces and events more inclusive for trans people, which is really great. The truth is, there are so many small things and some larger things that you can do to not only give your existing trans coworkers and community members a good experience, but also to make sure that even if you don't currently have any trans coworkers or community members, you're providing a space and an experience that will be welcoming in the future. So let's start with the basics. Not even the basics, but the basics of the basics. I'm so glad these GIFs are working. Anyway, so what is trans, what is cis? So the simple answer is trans means you don't identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, and that is it. So not everybody who feels this way ends up identifying with or using the word trans to describe themselves, but the word is there if they want to use it. So for example, someone who is a trans man is someone who was assigned female when they were born and figured out later that he was male. A trans woman is someone who was assigned male at birth and later realized she was female. It's not that complicated, honestly. Cis just means you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. So like when you were born, the doctor was like, it's a boy, and you're like, cool, I'm a boy. You're cis, it's cool. Anyway, so transgender and trans and cisgender and cis are adjectives. So people are not transgendered or cisgendered. So just, if you want to be respectful, just, use the right language. What is non-binary? Non-binary like literally just means your gender just doesn't fall in that male-female binary. It just falls outside of that. Some combination or absence of male and female. There's a common misconception, for whatever reason, that non-binary means someone who was assigned female at birth who like leans a little masculine. But in reality, non-binary means a million things. There's no one way to be non-binary. There's not even 2 or 3 ways. There's like infinite ways to be non-binary. And technically it falls under the trans umbrella, but some non-binary people don't consider themselves trans. I'm non-binary and trans, so I don't, that's not me, but like, it's totally fine, and if someone tells you they're non-binary and they're not trans, like, just accept it. Everyone's different. It's okay if you don't understand. I think something really important that cis people often don't get is that it's okay for you to not understand trans people in order to respect us and treat us with dignity. I don't know what it's like to be cis or straight, but that doesn't stop me from being able to respect others. You don't have to totally understand what it's like to be someone in order to respect someone. So I don't know if you can even read the text, but Tan is saying people say a lot of stupid shit, and I think that's funny. Pronouns are a perfect example. So like when someone first comes out to you as trans or you meet a trans person, they might want you to use a different pronoun than you're used to. And you might not understand because to you, they don't look like someone who would use those pronouns. Or maybe they want you to use they, them pronouns and you're like, this is a wild concept I've never encountered before. Just try. All you have to do is try. You don't have to get it. If you mess up or someone corrects you, you just quickly say, I'm so sorry, and correct yourself. Don't make a big deal out of it. Eventually, it will be second nature. It just takes practice. And while we're talking about pronouns, I should mention as an aside that a person's pronouns are just a person's pronouns. So like my pronouns are they, them. They're not, it's become common for people to be like preferred pronouns, but only when they talk about trans people. It's like, actually, everybody has pronouns. They're not preferred, they're just our pronouns. Also worth mentioning that sometimes people, for whatever reason, start thinking, oh, using they, them is like really great because I could just use they, them for everyone. It's a really simple solution. I don't have to remember different pronouns for different people. But this is bad. If you have a trans person who's using he, him pronouns and you call him they, you're actually still misgendering him. So think of it this way. You have to learn a different name for everyone you meet. You can probably learn pronouns from a set of like 3 that most people use. Compared to having to learn all those names, like think about it, it's not that hard. So now that we've discussed some basics, let's move on to the next level and talk about what you can actually do right now to make things better and more welcoming for trans and non-binary people at your company or event or meetup group or what have you. So back to pronouns. For me, as a non-binary person, it is impossible for someone to guess what my pronouns are just by looking at me. So my life is just like a series of awkward situations where I have to figure out how to tell a person or a few people or a whole room full of people that I use they, them pronouns. This can be the case for binary trans people too. They might also find it hard for people to know right away what their pronouns are. So a really simple way to mitigate this is by being proactive. Just make sure that people are given every opportunity to state their pronouns. At the beginning of a meeting where a new person is introduced to the company, have whoever is running the meeting start by saying their name and their pronouns and have all the other employees follow suit. Just make it a super normal thing. If you have an employee page on your website, have everyone include their pronouns. This also helps prospective employees know that you at least intend to be a trans-inclusive space. And that goes a long way, at least for me. So the same thing goes for events. Anywhere a person's name is listed, try to include their pronouns. Always offer pronoun stickers or pins, or have a way for people to write their pronouns on their badges, like large enough so people can see them easily. And write yours too, even if you're cis, especially if you're cis, and like encourage others to do the same, even if they're cis. So anytime someone introduces themselves, just make sure pronouns are part of the introduction. I'm bad at doing this too, so it's okay. Like, don't feel bad that you don't do this all the time. But this picture is pronoun stickers from a meetup where I live in Portland called Donut.js, which is really great, and I love their stickers. Anyway, so make sure people know if they're interviewing candidates to introduce themselves with their name and their pronouns, and make sure the candidates do the same. If your company or your event has a Slack, make sure everyone includes their pronouns in their profile or their display name. Don't make it a thing that only the trans people have to deal with. Normalize it so like everyone does it and it's just a thing you do. So on that note, you might want to consider that if you do have a trans employee or coworker, you might want to ask them directly like what they want you to do if someone else misgenders them in a meeting or like in whatever you're hanging out. So don't assume that everybody is bold enough to correct others. I'm certainly not. So especially if they're new to the company, they're probably like, oh, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to wreck the boat. But by the same token, don't assume the person wants you to say or do anything. So just ask them in advance. Let it be up to them. Because it will happen. It's just a reality. And it's best to know ahead of time what the person wants you to do. On that note, if you've hired a trans person or someone who has just come out, you're wondering if something is okay, just don't assume. Just ask. So, like for example, this is from my real life. If you have a non-binary employee and usually you go to conferences as a team and everyone shares rooms with the same gendered employees, and you happen to have an exact split between men and women and then your one non-binary employee, which was me, don't assume which person the employee wants to room with. Just ask. And in my case, my employer did ask, which was really lovely. But also sometimes don't ask. There's a lot of things you should never ask. Luckily, this should be pretty simple to figure out. Just think like, would it be okay for me to ask a cis employee this question? If not, then it's not okay to ask a trans employee either. Don't ask if they've had the surgery, which is, by the way, there's no like the surgery. That's not a thing. That's a conversation for another day. So anyway, don't ask like literally any question that has to do with their body, especially their genitals. Like you would think that's obvious. Don't ask invasive medical questions, but it happens all the time. People like ask you about your genitals at work. This has not happened to me, but I know it's happened to other people, and it's like, anyway, so it's extremely common if you're a trans person to have people you barely know casually ask about what's in your pants. It's not appropriate, like, ever. So regarding health insurance, don't wait until a trans person is interviewing for a job or at your company to find out if you have trans-inclusive health insurance. You should find out today because most insurance companies these days have like some section in their literature or someone you can talk to and ask them like what's covered and what's not in regards to trans healthcare specifically. So just take some time to familiarize yourself with it. So when someone's interviewing with you and they're like, hey, do you have trans-inclusive health insurance? And you're like, it's like, it's not a great look. Anyway, so bathrooms come up a lot. You probably, if you're cis, you probably haven't put a lot of thought into bathrooms. But for a lot of trans people, it can be a minefield. Not for everyone, of course, but like for me it is. And I think it's really important that you know about the extent to which some of us sometimes fret and worry about bathrooms so you can try to do better in all the ways that bathrooms come up in life, which is all the time. One of the reasons I really like working remote is because I never have to think about the drama of using a gendered office bathroom. Even in the best, friendliest scenario, I always feel some kind of anxiety. Sometimes I've gone out of my way to wait until all the men are gone or in a meeting before I use the men's room in an office, especially if I don't know all of them. And usually there's only, I don't know how many of you know about men's rooms, but there's usually like one stall. And like I can't stand up to pee, so it's really awkward. Anyway, on occasion I've left an office to use a gender-neutral bathroom that's nearby or in the basement. If I'm at an event, like a conference or a meetup, and I don't know the bathroom situation ahead of time, sometimes I stop drinking any liquids hours ahead of time, even if I'm thirsty, and I won't eat anything for hours ahead of time, even if I'm hungry, just because I want to avoid having to use the bathroom while I'm there, unless I know for sure that there's a bathroom that I'm going to be comfortable in. So like, what can you do? So yeah, what I'm saying is like some trans people, we put a lot more thought into bathrooms, so what can you do about it? The best case scenario is you have single stall gender neutral restrooms. This is like the holy grail of toilets. Every time I go to a place and I see it, I'm like, it's just like a breath of fresh air, like, I can relax all night. So this is the least anxiety-inducing bathroom scenario. If you already have single-stall bathrooms, but they're gendered, just like take the signs off. There's no reason for, if you have two things that have toilets and they lock, don't put genders on them. It's so silly. Anyway, other things. Maybe you have a large office or event space with bathrooms in several locations. Is it possible to put new signs on one of them to make it gender neutral? Sometimes events will put up temporary signs over one set of bathrooms to make them gender neutral for that one event only. If you do have gender neutral bathrooms, but they're like really hard to find, put up signage by the gendered bathrooms so people know where to find them. Because I have called myself a truffle pig for gender neutral bathrooms. Like, I can go to like a giant event space and be like, it's over there. Anyway, so it's also worth putting a little thought into the bathroom situation. If you're hosting a company event or an offsite, it would be awesome if whoever puts the events together could do like a little bit of recon in advance of the bathroom situation, just so that like the trans people know like in advance what it is, like what is it, what's the situation. And this might be a little bit of an unusual tip, maybe totally unnecessary depending on where you are. But personally, sometimes if I'm in a situation where I have to use a gendered bathroom, and it's like I'm like freaked out about it, I have a bathroom buddy who will scout the bathroom right before me just to tell me, like, is anyone in there? Are there stalls? Are there doors on the stalls? Which is like a totally new thing for me to experience, doorless stalls, stuff like that. So occasionally, I'll have a friend go in with me so I feel safer. Usually for me, this comes up in bars that have like a lot of masculine, cis, straight men, like sports bars and stuff. And I get like freaked out about using the men's room there. So I'm not saying you have to do anything huge, but if you already have a really good friendship with a trans coworker and they use the same bathroom as you, it might be worth like privately asking like, hey, would it be helpful for you to like be a scout or like go in with you if you freaked out about it? Definitely not in front of anyone, definitely privately, definitely only if you have like a really good relationship with them. Otherwise, it's a really strange thing to hear from somebody. Anyway. So not everyone wants or needs this. And as I said, it depends a lot on the relationship you have. But I've had friends do it for me at bars with like a lot of dudes in them who were like, yeah, sports, and and it was like really helpful. So because it really sucks to be out at a bar like with your coworkers and you feel like you have to leave. Like I've also left events way earlier because I don't feel comfortable using the bathroom there, and it sucks because in some cases it means like you miss out on important networking opportunities or meeting people that could be of value, like valuable for you to know or whatever, and that sucks. So speaking of company offsites and events, sometimes you might find yourself traveling to and from an airport with a trans coworker. You probably already know a little bit about how terrible the TSA is just from like existing and going through the airport. But you might not be aware like how awful it can be if you're trans trying to get through the airport. Sometimes, not for everyone. But unfortunately there's not a lot you can do personally about the TSA just being awful, but there's ways you can be supportive. So this is how I feel every time I go through the airport. So you might not be aware of this, but the scanners that they put you through at the airport require the operator to decide over the course of like half a second whether to put you as male or female. And the way the scanner scans your body for bombs or whatever is like it compares your body to what it expects a male or a female body to look like. So, like, for example, before I had top surgery, but I've been on testosterone for a while, I got stopped and frisked every single time for chest abnormalities. I still sometimes get flagged and frisked for the, like, even more horrifying groin abnormalities. So, like, I actually got into the habit during that time of stepping, like, I would step in the machine and then jump out and be like, I have boobs! So they would flip the other switch. So it's like, and they all would be like, what? Like, they, like, don't understand. I'm like, just flip the switch, and then it would be fine. But it was way better than having them be like, I don't know, there's something happening, and then like pat me down, and it's like really invasive. Anyway. So sometimes, literally, depending on the mood of that TSA agent and how transphobic they are and like what city you're in or whatever, this can go extremely poorly. It has the potential to be a really humiliating experience if you're trans. So if you're the cis person in the situation, like, you don't really have to do a lot, but like make sure you're close by in the security line, pay attention to how the TSA is treating your coworker, listen to how they're talking to them. Be prepared to serve as a witness if things go badly. Consider having your phone ready to record if something really bad happens. If the TSA tries to move your coworker to a different location, be ready to step in and ask your coworker if they want you to follow. Most of the time it's fine. It's like maybe awkward at worst, but things can and do go really, really wrong for trans people moving through TSA. And it's good to be prepared in case this happens to your coworker. So yeah, like speaking from experience, like being traumatized by TSA is a really awful way to start a work trip. And if you want to learn more about like what it's like to fly while trans, there was a really great article in New York Times recently that was an opinion piece called Flying While Trans that I would invite you to read, as well as a piece that is referenced in that about a really specific bad experience that one trans woman went through. So you can see like exactly how bad it can be, like, and it can be extremely, extremely bad. One thing you might not have considered or realized is how much more trans-friendly your workplace becomes when you allow people to work remote. Even if you have a primarily like IRL office, if you just have if you just blanket allow people to work remote as much or as little as they want without having to necessarily say like, I have a really good reason for doing, like, they shouldn't have to like have a really good reason. They could just say, I'm working remote today, and no one cares. It's fine. Yeah, so if you do that, then you unintentionally solve a lot of common issues that trans people face in the workplace. The bathroom issues are solved, of course, but there's other less obvious things. So some trans people can have days or weeks or months where they have really bad gender dysphoria. And if you don't know what that is, then like, look it up. It's sort of hard to explain, but it can be really debilitating for a person to experience. And when it happens, it's often just like way easier to just work remote than have to manage your dysphoria in an office setting where there's 1,000 different triggers that could be setting you off and making it worse. So like I don't experience that much gender dysphoria anymore, but when I used to have to wear a binder, there were days when like the way my clothes fit over my binder would be a huge dysphoria trigger. And like I would sometimes, like on one occasion I had a panic attack at an event because I was just like, I couldn't deal and I had to go home. Yeah, and other times I would have to wear a binder that was uncomfortable and it would like restrict my breathing or make my chest hurt, and if I had to go into the office and then like go straight to a meetup or something afterwards, you're only supposed to wear a binder for 8 hours, max. And I would end up having all these breathing problems and I would be in pain for like days afterwards. But if I could work remote that day, I wouldn't have to put it on until I left to go to the event later, and it would just like solve so many problems. And this is like, obviously this is just one personal example, but there's so many different situations where the ability to work remote creates a much more trans-friendly workplace kind of by default. So it's worth considering. STRUGGS to FUNC, if you're not familiar with Queer Eye, it means struggle to function. This is something that really, it kind of goes for any marginalized group. And you might not be aware of it, but like these days, trans people's rights are on the line almost constantly. We've become a really popular target of public discussion in the news, a large variety of news media and like other media. So if you're trans, it's like, it's almost impossible to ignore, and it can be really hard to deal with. I've had days where like I could barely function because I read something about how the Supreme Court is deciding whether I should be protected from discrimination in the workplace. There's also been discussion recently about rolling back a lot of healthcare protections that would make it so trans people can be refused medical care in general, like even if it's not related to transition at all. So that's really, really scary, and it's hard to not let that news affect you when it has to do with your day-to-day life, especially when it sometimes feels like no one cares, that like your life is on the line. So what can you do? I strongly recommend reading this great blog post by Laura Hogan from 2017 called Managing in Terrible Times that talks a lot about this and makes a lot of wonderful suggestions. Personally, I really like when I see my coworkers like show little public support on the internet, you know, like even just like retweeting a thing or just saying something small. And like another example is like at my last job when it was Pride season, my boss got like all these little tiny trans flags, and it was really cute, and she put them all over the office, and she put one on the front door, and it was just like, it was really cute and subtle, and I really liked it, and it made me, you know, feel like someone was thinking about me, and it mattered a lot. Moving on, in recent years, I've noticed a trend among meetups and conferences and other events and groups that were like formerly for women in tech, but they're like attempting to rename themselves to be more inclusive. But unfortunately, it often seems like they're not really sure who they're trying to be inclusive of. So they end up naming their groups these things like women and non-binary or women and femmes, or like the, in my opinion, extremely confusing WIMKIN. Which I've never met anyone who was like not a cis woman who was like, yes, WIMKIN, like, none of us like it. Anyway, it's usually like, honestly, it's like a well-meaning attempt. It's usually everyone means well. The event organizers, they want to be inclusive of trans women, possibly inclusive of non-binary people, but like probably not trans men, but like they probably should. Yeah, and I think there's just a lot of confusion among cis event planners, like about what they want to be inclusive of and like what the best wording is and who they want to include. So, you know, if you're confused right now, like I don't blame you. It's like, it's confusing. So let's break the whole thing down from the beginning so we can figure out what's wrong with most people's current approaches and see how we can do it better. First of all, I'm going to assume that whatever event or group we're talking about, it probably started as something for women because women are still an underrepresented gender in tech. Many women experience misogyny and discrimination in their workplaces and in many tech spaces. Many women were raised to conform to like some particular personality types or traits, like you don't rock the boat, you don't speak up, you can't be pushy. And that can really affect their careers in really big ways. It's still a male-dominated field, and most men are raised to be the opposite of all that stuff. So it means it can be exceptionally hard for women to forge a path. So it 100% makes sense that over the years, groups and events have popped up so women in tech can organize and commiserate and network, among other things, in a safer space. In recent years, though, women's spaces, I just like lost my notes. Women's spaces have become more aware that they should be more inclusive to trans women, which is great because trans women are women, and it should be obvious, like if something's for women, it should also be for trans women. Like that's a no-brainer that I'm just operating off of here. So as people have become more aware of the existence of trans women and their collective need to be recognized and accepted part of women's spaces, they've also become aware of other marginalized genders, most notably non-binary people. Usually, though, women's spaces first become aware of non-binary people because someone in the group who formerly identified as a woman comes out as non-binary, so the group doesn't want to exclude that person, and so they start saying, women and non-binary, or like the more inscrutable, women and femmes. Like this is where we start getting into issues, because non-binary means a lot of different things. Femme means a lot of different things. So the messaging with both of these can be really, really confusing. There's non-binary people who were assigned male at birth and don't consider themselves femme. There's people like me who were assigned female at birth that took testosterone, and now, like, you know, for lack of a better phrase, you like look like a man to most people. And even though we're all non-binary, like a lot of us wouldn't feel comfortable going to an event that's called Women and Non-Binary or like Women and Femmes. Even though we may be non-binary. Yeah, not to mention trans men who are an often completely ignored or forgotten marginalized group who sometimes have experienced many or all of the same or similar problems as women in tech are just completely excluded. So if this is you, what should you call your group or your event? There's so much to think about. So like, first of all, I want to get this out of the way because I feel like a lot of people think that this means I'm saying like every group should have all genders, but I'm not saying that. I think it's fine, it's great to have something that's just for women. You're under no obligation to include more marginalized genders. I just ask that you think about the mission for the group and you think critically about who you're including, who you're excluding, and why. Like, especially I ask that you give, if you're doing like a marginalized genders kind of group, I ask that you consider, like, you seriously consider why you're excluding trans men, because you probably are, and you probably shouldn't. So yeah, most of the time these groups and events actually mean they want to include everyone who's not a cis man. So that would include everyone who is assigned female at birth, everyone assigned male at birth who doesn't identify as a man, which includes many non-binary people, and of course trans women. It would include some intersex people. So if you've taken a long time to think about the mission of your group and you've decided, yes, I do want to include all marginalized genders, not just, you know, trans and cis women, then I would strongly recommend you consider changing the name and or mission of your group or event accordingly. My first suggestion is to use the phrase marginalized genders. You know, it's not that snappy, and I'm sorry, but we're at the limits of the English language. It avoids describing your group in opposition to something, which I'm not a fan of being like not cis men, because it's like, nah, like, yeah, just describe who it's for. You can always put an asterisk next to the name on your flyer and just at the bottom say, describe what you mean, or say not cis men at the bottom. Just otherwise be sure that whatever your group is for, like that the naming accurately describes who the group is for and isn't accidentally excluding somebody who you mean to include. And if you have doubts, there are consultancies like Otter Tech Diversity and Inclusion Consulting that can help you figure this stuff out. Finally, I have a miscellaneous tip that didn't really fit anywhere else, and that is to not look up trans people. This happened to me when I playfully teased in a meeting that I had published work under a different name so no one would ever find it. And one of my coworkers went and found it. He found my birth name, he messaged me and asked me if that was my birth name. He thought it was like a fun, cute thing. He had no idea. Yeah, so fortunately he privately messaged me about it, but it could have been extremely devastating for me if he had posted it in like a company-wide channel. It made me super uncomfortable that he knew my old name, but like at least no one else knew. So, you know, please don't underestimate the devastating power that somebody's birth name can have, especially if there's a lot of people around, if you're in an open office or a company-wide Slack channel. Personally, the more people I meet and get to know who never knew my birth name is like really special. Like I know they'll never mess up, they'll never call me the wrong name, and it just feels really good to know that someone has only ever known me as that name and that person. So just think twice before you Google your trans coworker, especially if other people are around, because it can have like really, really devastating unintended consequences. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that everything I mentioned are like things you should think about today. Don't wait until you're interviewing or hiring a trans person to start worrying, not only because you want to be prepared for the future, but also because you might have a closeted trans person in your company right now. You might also have a stealth trans person who's working with you and they want to be out, but they aren't sure if it's safe. So yeah, one of the biggest reasons I ended up at my current company is because they were already doing a lot of this stuff. So I was like, this is great, this will be a great fit for me. So I'm also happy to speak in more detail about any of this stuff after the talk. So feel free to come find me in the hallway or tweet at me. There's some things I didn't really get to speak about as much as I wanted to, so I'm happy to talk more. And if you have a more complex concern, I'll probably refer you to a consultancy where people get paid to do that. But for most basic questions, I'm really happy to discuss it. And of course, I don't represent all trans people. So if an individual trans person tells you something that differs from what I've said, just respect that person's wishes. Last but not least, I felt bad that all my Queer Eye gifts didn't have any Bobby. Bobby has been underrepresented. So here's one of like 3 Bobby gifts that I was able to find that weren't stupid. But hopefully you can see why there's nowhere I'm going to fit a total DILF into this talk. Anyway, again, I'm Julien. I am _JBFitz on Twitter, and I welcome your thoughtful DMs. I'm also always looking to build community with other trans and non-binary tech workers, so feel free to say hi to me if you see me or talk to me, whatever. Thank you so much. The end.